Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Welcome to the Avexia webinar series. Our topic for tonight is YorkTest Food Sensitivity Test for Juniors, the science behind IgG testing and what makes YorkTest different. My name is Christopher Chu. I am the Director of Marketing for Avexia Diagnostics and will be your host for this evening. Today, I have the distinct pleasure of being joined by our guest, Dr. Gill Hart, who will be our presenter for this webinar. Dr. Hart is an expert biochemist with over 30 years of experience in the development and validation of hospital standard diagnostic tests and testing services. Dr. Hart completed her PhD in pituitary function in 1987 and started her career as a senior biochemist at the Hammersmith Hospital. Dr. Hart subsequently worked for a number of R&D companies, being responsible for the development and validation of unique diagnostic tests and testing services for hospital, practitioner, and consumer use. Dr. Hart joined the food intolerance company YorkTest in 2005 and has been instrumental in building this food intolerance, allergy, and health testing company into the market leader it is today. As YorkTest's scientific director, Dr. Hart has applied her scientific and regulatory knowledge to all YorkTest services. Joining Dr. Hart tonight will be Dr. Wayne Sedano, our Director of Clinical Support and Education at Avexia Diagnostics. Additionally, Dr. Sedano is the Director of Integrative Medicine Education for the College of Integrative Medicine and lectures and teaches internationally. Before we begin, just a bit of housekeeping. We welcome your questions. If you have a question, you may submit your question in the questions field in the right-hand area of the interface. We will answer the submitted questions by email within a day or two. Without further delay, I will now turn the webinar over to Dr. Hart.
Thank you so much for that introduction and for inviting me to speak about something that I'm really passionate about. And as you've already introduced the title, I'd like to talk today about introducing you to our new YorkTest food sensitivity test for juniors, which we are offering alongside our premium food sensitivity test. I'm also going to talk about some of the science behind IgG testing and what makes YorkTest different. I'm really proud to be a pioneer of food intolerance testing in the UK. YorkTest designed and developed our food-specific IgG test in 1998. So we have a lot of experience in this area, which I'd like to share with you today. You've already introduced me beautifully, so just to reiterate that I'm a PhD biochemist, and I've been with YorkTest for 17 years as scientific director. YorkTest have a long heritage, a heritage that spans back 40 years and originates from a collaboration with the University of York in the UK. And that makes us, really proud of what we do. We're the UK's leading food sensitivity, allergy and health test provider, which we're really proud about. And now actually also a leading food sensitivity test provider in the US. We help practitioners to support your clients' health, nutrition and well-being with our food sensitivity tests. We have our own accredited laboratory, which I'm going to talk to you about later on. Again, with a long history of manufacturing and testing food-specific IgG, food sensitivity. This means that we're able to provide really high-quality testing and accurate results, and I'll be able to share with you some of our data later on in the talk today. So the agenda for today is really to sort of start with the basics, the background of food sensitivity and allergy, food allergy, what makes them different to each other, because there's often a lot of confusion about the two. To talk a bit more about food-specific IgG antibodies, when we're measuring this, what actually are we measuring, and what characteristics do they have? to talk about our process, our manufacturing and our testing process at YorkTest, to tell you a little bit more about our premium and junior sensitivity tests. And for me, the most important thing is to show you the evidence that our tests are effective. And this is important for any test provider. Always ask the question, how do you know your test works? I'll then cover at the end some of the independent clinical studies that have been published on food-specific IgG testing and how effective it can be. And we'll talk at the end about working with YorkTest and how you can work with Evexia and YorkTest in your practices. So to start with, a little bit about food sensitivity and food allergy. The classical food allergy antibody involves the IgE antibody. And the classical food allergy tends to involve, one or two foods. It may be milk, eggs, shellfish, nuts, peanuts. And even a very tiny amount of that food can provoke an allergic reaction, which is potentially life-threatening. Symptoms are very, very quick onset and very severe. And this IgE reaction is very well understood. The IgE reaction is very well understood. And it reflects the characteristics of the IgE antibody, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Food sensitivity is very different. It's a widely used term, a wide scope. We call it food intolerance in the UK. Food intolerance and food sensitivity cover a whole range of different types of reactions, and they're much more common. They're harder to identify, and reactions can take up to 72 hours to manifest themselves, and this again reflects the characteristics of what we're measuring. Usually multiple food and drink ingredients can be involved. Certainly at YorkTest, people that come to YorkTest and have positive reactions tend to react to on average about 4 or 5 different foods. Rarely a lot more, but obviously that can reflect leaky gut. And so if you were to start from scratch to try and work out which foods you were reacting to, and you've got 5 or 6 different foods, it would be really, really difficult to do without a test. The prevalence of food sensitivities and intolerances and related diseases is estimated to affect at least 100 million people worldwide. The prevalence of food sensitivity is believed to be as high as 45% of the population, although there aren't very good stats on this. I keep looking for more, so if anyone's got any good stats, please send them through. And so the real true prevalence of food sensitivity remains unknown. And I think that often reflects the fact that it does cover a broad brush of different types of food reactions, which we're going to talk about now. If you think about the different types of food intolerance sensitivity reactions, we can start with those that don't involve the immune system, non-immune mediated. These include things like enzyme deficiencies, such as lactose intolerance, when you have a deficiency in the lactase enzyme which breaks down milk sugar, your alcohol intolerance with alcohol dehydrogenase deficiency, or your histamine intolerance with diamine oxidase deficiency. These are examples of enzyme deficiencies. You can have reactions to FODMAPs. These are your fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. These are short-chain carbohydrates, which for some people can be really problematic if they start to ferment in the lower gut and can contribute to things like IBS. And then we talk too about non-immune mediated chemical sensitivities. Remember that small molecules, things like caffeine, sulfites, sugar, MSG, when you've had these, alcohol, when you've taken these in, pretty much straight away when you've had them, your caffeine, your sugar rush, your alcohol, And that's because they are tiny molecules. They go straight in through your stomach wall, straight into your bloodstream through the blood-brain barrier. These tiny, tiny molecules cannot form an immune response. They're too small. And I think this is really important to remember. But chemical sensitivities are non-immune mediated, but very real for a lot of people. And then you have immune system involvement. You have things like celiac disease, which is an autoimmune disease. And then you have your responses to food proteins. And food proteins are large molecules. You can only have these reactions to the large molecules. So you've got your IgE allergy, and then your IgG reaction, your delayed allergy or food sensitivity. So the food intolerance sensitivity testing market consists of tests that are used to help towards the diagnosis of known disorders, things like celiac disease, lactose intolerance, allergies that we've talked about, and tests that provide information to help people help practitioners prioritise which foods to avoid and which are suitable to eat. And that's where food-specific IgG testing comes in. We're not diagnosing diseases, we're actually providing a really excellent route map for a starting point for an elimination diet. And then very sadly, we have tests that have no basis in science. These include things like hair tests for food sensitivity, and also companies that claim that food-specific IgG tests for small molecules and chemicals, things like IgG reactions to aspartame, benzoate, saccharin, ascorbic acid, MSG, those aren't possible because you need a larger molecule to form an immune response. And any tests actually that are provided without efficacy data. So the options for those who might suspect they might react to foods, they can do nothing. A lot of people do nothing, they live with their symptoms. They can guess what to remove without any evidence at all. They can undergo an elimination diet and challenge process where they're trying to guess which foods they might be reacting to and take them out of their diet just one at a time, then challenge them back into the diet and see if their symptoms recur. Very laborious process. You can undertake a food-specific IgG guided elimination diet strategy. And this is an effective way of, a route map for an elimination diet. This slide really covers the elimination diet and challenge, which is accepted as a gold standard worldwide. It is very time consuming and compliance can be poor. It's difficult to determine the exact combination of foods causing the symptoms and problems because they're seen 2 to 72 hours after consuming reactive foods. Even people keeping strict food diaries find it difficult. And as I say, with YorkTest, when you're on average reacting to 4, 5, 6 different foods, it's virtually impossible to determine exactly what they are without doing a food-specific IgG test. So why are we measuring food-specific IgG? Well, it's a robust indicator that the immune system has been triggered by a specific food. It can be used as an aid to management of dietary intake. It provides an effective fast track to help define an elimination diet protocol. It gives the gut time to heal. Removal of the foods identified by the test is part of the healing process. And unlike allergies, foods can sometimes be reintroduced. The elimination diet is not necessarily for life. And sometimes people can tolerate a little bit of a food and maybe not too much, but just a little bit. And that's where your expertise comes in to help people guide them through the process. I'd like to talk now a little bit about the characteristics of IgG antibodies. When we talk about measuring IgG, people think, oh, it's just one thing, we're just worrying one specific IgG antibody. But IgG antibodies make up 10 to 20% of all blood plasma proteins created and released by plasma B cells. There are 4 different subtypes, and we're really proud at YorkTest to measure all 4 subtypes. We don't break the results down into 4, but we actually, as a total, give you the reaction to all 4 subtypes, and this is really, really important. IgG molecules are long-acting. IgGs 1, 2, and 4 have a half-life of 21 days. That's a really long time in the blood. The IgG3 is about 7 days. When you compare it to the IgE, the allergy reaction is only 12 to 48 hours, which reflects the immediacy of the IgE reaction and the longevity of the IgG reaction. And this is really important when you're thinking about the differences between allergy and sensitivity and the different ways that the symptoms onset. Also, IgG is incredibly stable, which is brilliant for us because we've developed, back in 1998, we developed a very little unique wand, which I'll show you in a moment. And the actual stability of the food-specific IgG on that little wand is 30 days at room temperature, which means shipment to us is really not a problem at all. I really like this summary, actually, from Frontiers in Immunology, a review article published in 2014, but very, very relevant today. It may not be very clear because it's quite small here, but you can see that it describes some of the differences between our IgG subtypes. You can see IgG 1, 2, 3, and 4 across the top. You can see the different half-lives. You can see that the antibody response requires protein or polysaccharide. You can see the differences in complement activation between IgG 1, 2, and 3, but not 4. And also, you can see the differences between the way the different IgGs react with efficacy gamma receptors. These are receptors found on cells such as B lymphocytes, natural killer cells, macrophages, neutrophils, platelets, and mast cells. And they involve, when they bind to the IgG, which is, bound to your food, they can affect the immune response. And some of these immune responses are to do with intolerance mainly, but also some to do with protection and intolerance, particularly for IgG4. So when we're talking about measuring IgG, it's not just one little thing. We're measuring 4 different subtypes and they all have different characteristics. So when we're measuring IgG, we're talking about pro-inflammatory responses, mainly IgG 1 and 3. We're talking about complement activation and immune complexes with IgG 1 to 3. We're talking about Fc gamma receptor actions activating and inhibiting with all 4 subtypes. We're talking about protection, some tolerance, IgG4. And we're talking about interplay with the T cell response. There's a role for the T helper cells, the regulatory T cells, and cytokines within this complex immune system. There's a role in for IgG in autoimmune diseases, which I'll show you in a later slide. And this response is a core component of the intestinal inflammatory response. A little bit more about that. It's quite important, actually. 70% of your immune system is in your gut. Your gut immune system has the challenge, really. It's been bombarded every day. And it needs to try and work out what's okay and what's not okay. Being unresponsive to food antigens, yet forming its function to protect ourselves. Remember, though, that tolerance is the normal state, and it is not the case that high levels of IgG antibodies are formed to all foods that are consumed regularly. We wouldn't see the results that we see at YorkTest if that was the case. And so tolerance is the normal state, and it's not normal to have a lot of food reactions. Again, I think food-specific IgG testing has been questioned over the years because there have been tests developed that have not been designed very well, and they have a lot of reactions, and that is not the norm. I think what we see at YorkTest is that on average, we're getting these sort of relatively low numbers of reactions to foods. Obviously, those with leaky gut have more reactions. There's an increased gut permeability to large molecules, has a role in exacerbating inappropriate immune responses. And remember, IgG is one small piece in a large immune jigsaw, and it's a long-acting marker of inflammation. So just a schematic here that I always use, actually, just showing with your yellow circles here, your food particles in your gut, your number 2 here, your gut membrane becoming permeable and allowing larger protein molecules into your bloodstream, and the whole process potentially provoking an immune response. And a little reminder that the immune response is not straightforward. There's an awful lot more going on than just a simple one-to-one reaction. I mentioned earlier about the autoimmune responses, and I think there was a really lovely article by Gill Hart et al. In 2017, which really analysed where the different IgG subtypes could be involved in autoimmune reactions and disease associations with these. IgG1, they did a lot of work on reviewing literature. IgG1 relating to hepatitis C, monoclonal gammopathy, IgG2, hypothyroidism, obviously the autoimmune thyroid response and irritable bowel. IgGs 1 and 3 relating to rheumatoid arthritis. IgG4 autoimmune pancreatitis, aspirin exacerbated respiratory disease, nasal polyps, eosinophilia and celiac disease. So, there are roles already very well defined for autoimmune reactivity involving IgG, and obviously the potential for IgG very much so to be pro-inflammatory. So just a little summary really. IgG is an indicator that the immune system has been triggered, an immunological defense against the food. It's very one small part of a wide and very complex immune picture. In reality, there's a complex interplay between the antibody humoral response and the T cell cell-mediated response and the inflammatory cytokines going on. So it's not just about immune tolerance, irrespective of the wider immune picture. IgG1 and IgG3 in particular have strong pro-inflammatory properties. So what does this mean for the individual? All this is going on. What does this mean? Common symptoms. I'm always amazed at the breadth of symptoms that result from an IgG response. They're very real for people. Everything from, you typically think about your gastrointestinal symptoms, bloating, cramps, constipation, IBS, diarrhea. And certainly there's a very strong role, we'll see later, for IgG and ulcerative colitis, Crohn's and IBD. Then we, think about energy levels actually is a key one that people come back to us about, improvement in energy levels, links to weight loss and weight gain, and skin problems such as psoriasis, eczema, rashes, urticaria and acne, headaches and migraines, respiratory problems which you might suspect, things like rhinitis, sinusitis, glue ear in children, and things like joint pains, arthritis, fibromyalgia, but also low mood, anxiety and depression. There have been links through to that as well, and some really interesting papers that I'll show you later. So a wide breadth of symptoms are involved. Now I'd like to talk next a little bit about our laboratory and what we do at YorkTest and how we measure our food-specific IgG. So here we have a little picture of some of our laboratory team and some of the equipment we use. We've got state-of-the-art equipment at YorkTest and a great strong team of scientists headed up by our laboratory director at the back there, Rob Wilson. And we actually manufacture the food-specific IgG test, the ELISA test, the enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay, and do all the testing in our laboratory. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, we developed the food-specific IgG test in 1998 with a collaboration with scientists from the University of York in the UK. We have a very strong evidence base that our tests are effective, which I will share some of that data with you later on. Our laboratory is headed up by Lab Director Rob Wilson with 25 years years of experience with a team of very experienced scientists. We have an established food-specific IgG test manufacturing facility and testing laboratory. And we developed our unique absorbent wand collection method for food-specific IgG testing. We're also accredited in the UK to ISO 13485, an international accreditation with annual inspection by representing the UK's Medical Health Authority. Our food-specific IgG test used established enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay technology. ELISA tests are used and can be designed to measure lots of different factors, everything from HIV to hormones to infectious diseases, through to immune antibodies. And so we've developed our test to measure food-specific IgG. We have 24 years experience in providing consistent, high quality controlled manufacturing and testing processes to measure the IgG. And if you send split samples to laboratory, we show greater than 98% reproducibility between samples taken at the same time from one person. With each test that is run, so each sample that is run, we run 2 sets of 4 quality controls. And these all have to pass rigorous specifications, otherwise the results are not issued. And as I mentioned before, our test measures all 4 subtypes of IgG. We've already introduced our premium food sensitivity test to Avexia. This is our prime test for those aged 18 and over. This analyses our IgG reactions to over 200 food and drink ingredients, providing colour-coded results, which I'll show you in a moment. Expert analysis from our accredited laboratory, and aftercare includes the results guidebook and the food and drinks diary. But we'd now also like to introduce you to our junior food sensitivity test. This is a pared down version with an analysis of over 100 food and drink ingredients. So we don't include things like wine grapes or some of the more obscure foods and drinks. This is a tailored diet for children, new for Avexia, for children aged 2 to 17 years old. We provide colour-coded results again, and expert analysis and aftercare, results guidebook and food and drinks diary. So actually, in terms of how to take the test, well, we clearly need to wash our hands first, and we provide all that's needed in the test kit, the blood collection kit. So we have a wipe to cleanse the finger, lancets to prick the finger, and then we collect the blood in this little stick, which has a lovely sleeve over it, so that you can actually slide it across and get this actual wick full of blood. And that blood, the amount of blood that it collects, actually defines the volume. So you don't have to worry about whether you've collected too much or too little. That little stick is full and all red, then your client will be ready to go. We pop the sample back into the little pot provided in the blood collection kit, and that is sent back to our laboratory. When we actually receive it from the laboratory, we actually take that little wand and we put it into our laboratory special diluent, defined diluent, and centrifuge all the blood out of it, so it's extracted really cleanly, and so that's ready then as a solution to be used in our testing. I don't know if you're familiar with ELISA tests, but this is an ELISA plate. The ELISA plate actually consists of 96 little dishes, and for our premium test we use 2 of these, and for our junior test we use 1 of these. In the first column we have A, B, C, D. We have our 4 quality controls, so we have 2 sets of these for each of our premium tests. And you can see that the degree of yellow colour in each of these is, with the A1 at the top, that's our 0. Then we've got a B, which is a low positive, and a C, which is a high positive, and a D, which is our plate blank. Now, each of these little wells is coated with a different food type. And the actual coating process is absolutely critical to the result. So we use medical grade food types to be coated down. And then we block them with a proprietary blocker, which actually stops non-specific binding. And this is really important so that you don't get false positive results and over-recording. So that manufacturing process, the coating of these ELISA plates takes 2 days. And once they are ready and stored, we pouch them individually and store them desiccated, refrigerated, and then stability of those is about a year. So then when we come to actually do the test, this represents one of those little dishes, one of the little wells in the ELISA plate. So if you can imagine, say those blue circles are cow's milk. So at the bottom, you've got dried down cow's milk on the bottom. And we've got our solution of blood that we've got taken from the wand. And we actually bring in, pipette that in, so you can bring in our antibodies if they're present to cow's milk, give them a little wash. You can see them bind to the cow's milk. That's our food-specific IgG to cow's milk. We come in with a secondary antibody that's got an enzyme, which is the pink square. We use a substrate to that enzyme. And if that substrate and this chain all interlinks across, then you can see you've got a change in colour. And this is where you've got a degree of change in colour here across the different dishes. Now, I know that the bottom right one here is yeast, for example, which is obviously quite a middling positive here. What we do then is we actually measure the degree of yellow colour in each of these little dishes with a spectrophotometer, which gives a numerical value for them, and that is recalculated through against our calibrators A, B, C, and D to provide a numerical scale result for you. And that numerical scale result goes from 0 to 100 for each of the food reactions that are there. I will say that from a calibration point of view, the calibration is absolutely critical to the result. And we actually use a calibration based on milk-specific IgG reactions, which is as close as we can get to what we're actually measuring. The results are shown here. So as you can see, 0 to 11 is normal reactivity. 12 to 19 is borderline. So this means it could be important, but it's a low reaction. And high reactivity is between 20 and 100. And you can see here the specific example is hazelnut, agar, and sheep's milk. Wheat, coriander, and mollusks, and the scoring system, is shown even for those with normal reactivity. So you can prioritise really easily which foods to help, people remove from the diet. I think it's important to remember that the ELISA test formulation and design is fundamental to its effectiveness. So we don't know whether a test is effective until you start to generate data, because there are no international reference standards for food-specific IgG tests. So the only way that you're going to know if your test is effective is to generate data, which I'll show you in a moment. False positives remain the biggest challenge for test providers, and we use a proprietary formulation to block false positive results. Calibration to milk-specific IgG standards is important to closely match the markers that are being measured. The only way to show a specific IgG test is effective is with evidence, and as there's no global reference standards for food-specific IgG, each different food-specific IgG test provider needs to provide evidence of effectiveness. And we've done this over many, many years. Actually, this is in my introduction now to the evidence section. We did an independent survey, actually, of our customers via practitioners back in the end of 2020. It's 565 responses, and it said that YorkTest customers are overwhelmingly positive about their experience with the brand, as YorkTest consistently delivers across all consumer touch points. 91% agreed with that statement. Going back to the science though, back in 2007, I worked with our collaborators at the University of York, and we actually analysed data from 5,286 people that had taken the York test and published the data. And we found that the data provided evidence for the use of elimination diet based on food-specific IgG. 2007, very early days actually, and people now know this as mainstream testing, but in those days it wasn't as mainstream, and this was a really important paper to publish at the time. So we showed with the YorkTest test, with our evidence base, that 5,286 customers who'd taken the test, you know, out of that, on average, 76% of people felt better across a range of conditions, from psychological, low mood, right down to joint pains, digestive problems, etc. The sort of symptoms that we've already talked about. You can see we've broken that down further. This is unpublished data that we do share. You know, 777 of those people had irritable bowel, and 84% reported benefit. So we've got a breakdown. This is just a few examples. I've got a lot more symptoms breakdown available. So we've got a really good evidence base that for people taking the test and changing the diet, they are feeling better. On average, in this study, 76%. You can see the breakdown of the stats here for skin symptoms, migraines, headaches, tiredness, arthritis, aches and pains, and interestingly, low mood and anxiety as well. We showed very clearly as well that if people rigorously adhered to the diet and they felt better, they started to feel better within 3 weeks. 68% reported benefit within 3 weeks. And for those in those early weeks who introduced foods back into the diet, the ones that have been identified by the test, 92% noticed a return of symptoms on reintroduction of the offending foods, showing how specific the test is to determine the exact food that's causing the problem. Now we continue to collect data. This was our big study back in 2007, published in 2007, but collected over the years before that. Now I've been really keen that we continue to collect data, and we survey on a regular basis, and we review our survey data twice yearly in our quality management review meetings. And I'm really delighted to share with you some of this feedback data. So out of, here we've got, the original study in 2007, 5,286 people. Each year, a few hundred. I've started again at 2015, but we've got a data in between. And we are consistently seeing that the people that take the test and change the diet, 80% of them are reporting benefit back to us, right up to our study in 2021. We've just got our 2022 data back through. Again, we're showing a similar consistency, 81, 82% of people feeding back. So we have a wealth of data demonstrating that the test we manufacture and quality control is effective. The data is totally unique to YorkTest and has been collected over many years. And I believe the science behind IgG testing is catching up with YorkTest's original findings back in 2007, because we're seeing more and more in the literature now supporting the use of a guided elimination diet by measuring food-specific IgG. There are a lot of studies, and I'm going to whiz through some of these quite quickly, but I think it's important that you've got this as a resource for you, starting with a number of papers that I've written myself here with links through. If you'd like any more information about these, please do get in touch with Avexia, and we can sort of share, I can share a sort of a reference list for you. And going back to the original study, actually, the very first randomised controlled trial in IBS, which actually used the YorkTest published in Gut, which is the British medical journal, Gut, in 2004. It showed a significant effect in a randomized control trial of IgG testing, elimination diet, and helping people with IBS. And this has been followed up by, a number of studies. Again, this one by Guo back in 2012. IgG-specific food exclusion diets result in significant improvements in abdominal pain, diarrhea frequency, abdominal distension, stool shape, general feelings of distress, and total symptom score with patients in diarrhea-based IBS. And there's quite a lot in the literature around Crohn's disease. This one from Ben's really good study showing a double-blind crossover diet intervention study with, improvements with respect to stool frequency. And there's been more and more in the literature around this. This recent one here by Wang et al. Showing that Crohn's patients have a higher prevalence of food-specific IgG than ulcerative colitis patients and control. Furthermore, some more studies here showing, the effectiveness of IgG in IBD. An interesting study back in 2012 now. We talked about the, IgG and weight loss, and I don't really make any claims about this, but there is evidence in the literature that for those modifying their diet according to IgG, it can help people lose weight. And this was a great study, which even claimed that the test may represent a strategy to counteract the severe US obesity epidemic. A bit more about that, linking IgG antibodies with inflammation in children, and linking that to obesity as well. And quite a lot on migraine as well. So there's quite a few studies here on migraine. Interestingly here, this one combining probiotics with an IgG-based elimination diet showed an increased serum serotonin level was seen in subjects treated in this way. And the fact that IgG elimination diet combined with probiotics, which I know is something that a lot of our practitioners use, can be beneficial, extra beneficial. There's quite a lot of studies on migraines here, including this really good recent one actually, published in 2021, which migraine patients with positive IgG antibodies have worse migraine, anxiety, and GI symptoms. Inflammatory cytokines partially mediate the causal pathway between food-specific IgG antibodies, migraine comorbidities. Really excellent paper. There's been a little bit around rheumatoid arthritis. We saw earlier the link between IgG and autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, and some lovely papers from the Polish group on the role of IgG hypersensitivity in depressive disorders, really reflecting the fact that people that come to us do recognise that they can have a lift in mood and higher energy levels as well. A really good paper published in 2021, actually, this one actually compared the effectiveness of the IgG based elimination diet with FODMAP diet and a controlled diet that a gastroenterologist had provided with nutrition advice. And this was in the treatment of women with mixed IBS, so the diarrhea, constipation, IBS. And it actually showed that rotation diets based on IgG showed significantly better results compared to the low FODMAP diet or the gastroenterologist's general nutrition advice. This might not be too surprising, but it's great to see it published. And I think really this paper followed on, with talking about that, since the discovery of T helper cell 17 lineage, IgG must be looked at from a different point of view. IgG is not only the immunoglobulin that protects us, going back to what we're talking about with the IgG4, but it's also recognised as a mediator of inflammation and responsible for autoimmune diseases. Really interesting summary here as well. So in conclusion, IgG-mediated immunological responses play an important role in the pathogenesis of adverse food reactions. Many studies have found that the levels of food-specific IgGs in serum are significantly higher in individuals with food hypersensitivity. And many studies have found IgG-guided elimination diet to be effective. There's a substantial amount of evidence that diet adjusted to food-specific IgG levels can lead to symptom improvement, and the science and immunology behind these trials and studies fully supports this approach. YorkTest is a trusted partner. We have heritage, expertise, and most importantly, evidence-based. We have our own laboratory, quality control measures, accuracy and reproducibility. We have a highly honed calibration reference method measuring IgGs 1 to 4. We have the ease of use, unique finger prick blood wand with easy to understand scaled 0 to 100, which is great for ease of tracking. If you do follow-up results, you can actually see how on the scale you've changed, and very easy for prioritization of removal of foods. We have optimized signal to noise ratios with our tests and minimize over recording with effective blocking and ELISA test design. We measure IgG reactions to large molecule proteins, IgG reactions to fully standardized base food. And the main take home, efficacy evidence is vital, not just a few subjects, thousands of subjects, and YorkTest can demonstrate that efficacy for our food-specific IgG test. That is our premium test, and now for Evexia, also our test specifically designed for juniors aged 2 to 17 as well.
That was fascinating, Dr. Hart. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So now, no, I said yes. What did you say? Sorry.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Thank you. So now we're going to move to a question area. As I said before, please submit your questions in the questions field and we'll get you answers. But right now, I think Dr. Sedano, what did you reflect on here? Any thoughts?
Yeah, Dr. Hart, that was fantastic, and it cleared up a lot of questions that I had. So the technology and the information is always moving, and thank you so much. And I know you've worked hard. We have met before. Dr. Hart is wonderful and a researcher and someone that can be trusted with what she tells you. That is for sure. Just a couple of quick questions. One that I get, and one is about raw food and cooked food difference with animal. Can you address that for just briefly?
Yeah, that's a really good question actually, and a question that I get quite often. And I think when we talk in the YorkTest about measuring reactions to foods, we always talk about standardizing our tests with medical grade foods, which will be the raw food. And I have I really understand why there is an interest in measuring reactions to cooked foods. Basically your protein's been denatured in some way. But what I struggle with is actually how you would standardize that. And so when we've discussed it at our R&D meetings at YorkTest, we've really struggled to actually find out, if we were going to do egg, for example, cooked egg, how cooked is an egg, and how is it cooked, and is it, what is actually going on? And I still feel as a biochemist that even if you've got some denatured protein there, you have still got some of the protein structure that is typical of egg. And in the end, we're showing effectiveness to 80% of people using our test. And I wouldn't want to really claim that I could test for cooked egg when there isn't really a standardized cooked egg allergen that we can use and put on our coat on our ELISA plate. So that's why I've kind of steered away from it. but I think, you know, again, the raw food, cooked food thing is, you know, very relevant. I think particularly for people with oral allergy syndrome, etc. But for us, I want to always make sure that what we're measuring, we can claim we measure, we actually claim, you know, we've got a good evidence for that claim. And I would feel a little bit uncertain about using something as vague as the word cooked or processed, because it's not standardized right now. But you know, open to anybody that can come to us with a solution for that one.
Well, actually, that cleared that up, and it makes so much sense. And I want to thank you so much. That was appreciate your help.
So,
Thank you.
well, thank you for that, Dr. Sano and Dr. Hart. So, Dr. Hart, would you mind proceeding to the next slide? So I'll form. So I just want to bring up for our Vexia clients that are Ask the Doctor feature. As you just heard, Dr. Sedano, our Director of Clinical Support and Education, you have access to him through email to review test results, clinical conditions, and other test recommendations. He is very responsive. He'll get back to you at least, I would say most times under 24 hours, if not same day. And additionally, we have a scheduled telephone or video conference for a fee option. These are all accessible to the platform. Just go log in. On the left side, you'll see Ask the Doctor feature. Click on it, and then you'll have access to both options. So take advantage of that. Dr. Hart, next slide, please. Don't mind, that'd be great. So, okay, now that we've learned so much about food sensitivity and the junior version of the test, of YorkTest, I would like to review how to order the tests before we conclude the webinar. Step 1, log into your Vexia Diagnostics account and click on the Vexia link tab on the left column. Step 2, select your patient or create a new patient to assign the lab order to. Select specialty testing and click on the Add YorkTest products to the order tab. Use the search box to locate the desired test and click the blue plus symbol to add that test to the cart. Then review your order, make any edits, and then when you agree to terms and conditions, click place order. It's very simple, very simple. So that hopefully will help get you access to that test. Dr. Hart, next slide, please. And for any questions or issues you may have, contact Avexia Diagnostics by email at info@avexiadiagnostics.com or by phone 5 days a week at extended hours, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Time at 888-852-2723. A recording of this webinar will be available by email in the next few days. Dr. Hart, and the last slide, please. I'd like to thank Dr. Hart again and Dr. Sedano for this informative presentation. Thank you all for joining us for this webinar event. Until next time, from everyone at Avexia Diagnostics and YorkTest, stay healthy, stay safe, and we wish you all the best on your pathway to wellness. Thank you, everyone.
Chris, thank you. Dr. Hart, thank you so much again. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for inviting me today. I've really appreciated it. I've really enjoyed talking to everybody. I look forward to getting some questions back as well.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone.